Breath of the Wild, as well as several other Nintendo games, are beautiful in their design and art style, but you can't help but notice that the art style is more or less consistent with one another. Not in the sense that they look exactly the same, because that is pretty far from reality, but the art style of 90% of first-party Nintendo Switch games is insistent on being one that puts less strain on the hardware. We can look at other consoles in their library of first-party games and see a consistency of photorealistic video games and or games of higher poly counts. Of course, we can attribute the less demanding video games appearing more consistently across the Nintendo Switch with positive features. For instance, these games contain lower storage capacities, lower download times, and faster update speeds. However, we can also just as easily point to negative aspects of having less demanding titles on the platform. The main aspect being the reason why there is a lack of demanding titles on the platform to begin with, and this is strictly because of the platform it is on, the Nintendo Switch, which is subpar in computing power, to put it nicely. I'm not here to shit on the Nintendo Switch for its lack of internal hardware fidelity, as I've done that in several previous videos, all of which you can see by clicking the link in the description below. Let's just say that the Switch is at the blurred line between bearable and unacceptably underpowered as the scope of gaming continues to increase. That being said, there are several rumors of a Nintendo Switch Pro, which turned out to be the insurmountably disappointing Switch OLED, which was really meant for a niche of Switch gamers that didn't yet own a Nintendo Switch. As the years went on, however, there are more rumors of a Nintendo Switch Pro around the same time in which we got the Tears of the Kingdom delay announcement. Some say that the footage being shown looked quote-unquote too good to be running on a normal Nintendo Switch, which led some to believe that there is another console to be released with Tears of the Kingdom. And I'm not here to say whether or not that will happen, although, I mean, let's just be real, it probably won't. We're here to determine what Tears of the Kingdom would look like if it weren't being held back by the hardware that we know it is going to be on. We know based on the art style of Tears of the Kingdom alone that Tears of the Kingdom will have to be quote-unquote holding back due to it sharing the same art style as Breath of the Wild. Now, Breath of the Wild was a game, mind you, that pushed the Nintendo Switch to its limits. The developers used several techniques in Breath of the Wild to reduce strain on the Nintendo Switch. These include pop-in, asset swapping, the magical disappearance of animals, and even objects. Tears of the Kingdom is a game that is supposed to have Breath of the Wild as a base game, as well as numerous amounts of additions, which will definitely put more strain on the console. Now, since 2017, the release year of Breath of the Wild and the Nintendo Switch, developers have utilized some techniques which allow for more desired features to be present in a game while putting less strain on the hardware. For instance, and this is from Eurogamer, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 builds on the experience the team has acquired since its inception and comprehensively addresses a key weakness of the last series entry: image quality. In targeting higher end visuals, something that had to give was resolution taking a big hit. I think that's what they meant to say. That sentence didn't really make sense, but we'll continue. Dynamic pixel counts that could hit 540p docked and 360p in mobile, damn, were mitigated via a relatively simple spatial upscaler paired with intrusive sharpening. Xenoblade 3, however, represents a colossal leap forward in that respect. Monolith has both improved the overall visual quality while greatly boosting image quality, achieving this via what looks like a temporal super resolution solution, taking those lower pixel counts up to a passable rendition of 1080p when docked and 720p in portable play. The drawback to the solution is that with fast motion, visible breakup can occur, revealing the lower resolution nature of the image, but in most cases, image quality is perceptibly sharper than anything you'll see in Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Shit, I bet it is. Talking about some 540p dots. My bad, anyways. And the implementation is particularly impressive in portable mode, delivering one of the sharpest images from all the high-end titles we've seen on a Switch, a far cry from the exceedingly blurry Xenoblade 2. This would also hold true with the jump to Splatoon 3 from Splatoon 2. Even though Splatoon 3 used the same engine as Splatoon 2, it actually is difficult to tell as Splatoon 3 utilized AMD's Fidelity FX Super Resolution, FSR for short. It's an upscaling device which upscales by using data from the current frame being shown. This is in large part the reason why Splatoon 3 runs at a smooth and consistent 60 FPS in most cases, while in Splatoon 2, that game dropped in resolution when it was trying to maintain 60 FPS. I don't know if you guys know, but I was a prolific Splatoon 2 player. I 100%ed that game, and I am a very prolific Splatoon 3 gamer. The difference is night and day, and that is thanks to this AMD's Fidelity FX Super Resolution. So that just goes to show what it can do. Now, I know that Tears of the Kingdom will utilize some sort of newfound developer technique acquired throughout the years. We might see a consistent 30 FPS for the game, or maybe even an inconsistent but a base of 60 FPS, but I have a strong feeling that this will only exist to a certain extent and would show drawbacks here and there, as that is the case with literally all the other games on the Switch that use these newfound developer techniques. In Breath of the Wild, there were 4 shrines. There was a demand from players that the Divine Beasts were more expansive, contained more difficult puzzles, and that they used different aesthetic themes. While I don't think it would be too demanding to make more intricate Divine Beast puzzles, I would assume that the puzzles would have been more challenging and complex if it were on a more powerful system than the Nintendo Switch. In my opinion, the Divine Beasts, with the exception of Naboris and the 5th Divine Beast, were merely larger shrines, some of the shrines being even more difficult than the actual Divine Beast puzzles. The Divine Beasts were in the layout of having to unlock 5 terminals throughout 5 different large-scale puzzles. During and in between these sequences, you can freely move around and travel the outdoors. When traveling outside of the Divine Beast, you'll be greeted with a beautiful view of Hyrule while traveling with the Divine Beast in real time. Now, I don't know how much memory this feature uses, but I assume enough, given we're running on the Nintendo Switch of all platforms. And during these sequences, you will see the most asset swapping. Of course, we don't know what the Divine Beasts or dungeons will entail in Tears of the Kingdom, but assuming it was running on a more powerful hardware, then it would no doubt be bolstered with some of the things fans claim were missing. For example, enemy variety within the dungeons, enemies exclusive to a particular dungeon, more decorative themes. I mean, look at God of War Ragnarok's puzzles and landscapes. Absolutely beautiful, breathtaking, and detailed with the most scrutiny. Of course, this is running on a PS4/PS5, so imagine if Nintendo had the merit to do something like this via a more powerful hardware equivalent to that of the PS4 or the PS5. The dungeons would no doubt be impressive, not only in the puzzle department, but also in the detail department. We also know that the 5th Divine Beast was the most expansive out of all of them, as it released with DLC. Also, the DLC shrines, for the most part, were also more expansive than the normal shrines in the game, which of course only makes sense. It was released as DLC, you're paying extra money for it. If the Switch were as powerful as a PS4, a Divine Beast like the 5th Divine Beast would definitely be the least expansive out of all of them, in my opinion. Tears of the Kingdom's dungeons would be more decorative, aesthetically diverse, would have more enemies within the actual dungeon, and add much more complexity as a whole if it were running on better hardware. Enemies were another shortcoming that was in Breath of the Wild, more specifically the variety of enemies or lack thereof. Nintendo obviously tried to make up for the lack of enemy variety through the advanced enemy AI. As we all know very well, enemies can talk to each other as though they're having a cordial conversation, they can spot Link from realistic distances, and even use other enemies as weapons, as fucked up as it is. As the enemy intelligence was something Nintendo prided themselves on, I of course expect it to be expanded upon in Tears of the Kingdom. If a new hardware can bolster both enemy variety and updated AI, and I think a lot of combinations will be made. We see some combinations already in Tears of the Kingdom, such as Bokoblins and Taluses making a collaboration. I think there'd be a similar thing with Moldugas. I think that there would be archer enemies with bomb arrows, which were on some sort of specialized enemy camp that is attached to an uncomfortable Molduga who is constantly moving around in the sand, making the enemies on the camp harder to hit. Remember the side quest that detailed the events of Prince Sidon defeating an Octork the size of a mountain? Although I think it was hyperbolic, on more powerful hardware we could definitely see larger Octorks capable of shooting more massive boulders. And of course, fitting the side topic of discussion, the Octorks could be seen holding enemy camps. The raising and lowering of the Octork would alternate the enemy camp being within and out of reach of attack. Now don't forget about elemental enemies. They have appeared in Age of Calamity, and I'm fairly confident that they will also appear in Tears of the Kingdom. If we can take into account Okay, thanks, refrigerator. If we can take into account the frost talus that freezes the player just by touching it, we can also assert the idea that the talus would freeze normal enemies as well. I mean, in Breath of the Wild, we don't see normal enemies in Hebra paired alongside the frost talus besides frost pebblets, which also freeze the player upon making contact. With that being said, why would Tears of the Kingdom only have enemy camps coupled with non-frost and non-igneo taluses? In order to expand enemy camps onto the other kind of taluses, there would have to be more elemental enemies or elemental enemies to begin with, comprising the Igneo and Frost Talus's camps, as they would be immune to the Talus's natural effect. These enemies, such as the Ice Moblin and the Fire Moblin, can even produce identical abilities of freezing or setting things ablaze. With the idea that Tears of the Kingdom will pair enemies together to make a more diverse enemy Hyrule environment, then I definitely think that with greater hardware, the dragons would have been utilized. We got a secret boss fight with Naedra, which was, let's be honest, a little lackluster. I mean, you know, we go for the God of War on the PS4 bars, and God of War Ragnarok, which is on the PS4 and the PS5, more powerful hardware, and they actually show us what an actual dragon fight looks like.
Once we approach the dragon, we will kill or be killed. Understood?
Yes, Father.
Bloody hell! Finish there, you grabby dopper!
Really, nigga?
On a Nintendo Switch Pro or Nintendo's next console or whatever we're getting, I think all the dragons would have been under Ganon's influence and could directly attack the player if they get in a specific location made for a boss fight. For instance, the peak of Mount Lanayru for Naedra, Ryola Spring, or Mount Floria for Farosh, and East Stepleyan Badlands for Dinral. These boss fights could easily incorporate the elements that each dragon possesses. Even though they're good spirits, it seems as though Ganon's malice has resurged and could possibly be even more influential than in Breath of the Wild. That being said, if all three dragons got possessed, a Malice-stained Frost would be the basis of Naedra's attacks or powers, a Malice-stained Lightning for Farosh, and a Malice Flame for Dinral. This would not be a realistic speculation in my opinion if it weren't for more powerful hardware. Also, seeing as we live in a world where the more powerful Nintendo hardware is at our fingertips, then we could see some sort of destruction of a designated area during the boss fight with the massive dragons. Something that might be difficult to explain for now, but I will shed more light on it in a future video, is how the dragon's movement can affect the boss fight. In Breath of the Wild, we shoot designated areas of the dragon to collect specific parts of their bodies, which translates into items, whether it be a shard of the horn, claw, or body, which turns into a scale. This concept extends to the only dragon boss fight that was present in the game. However, when we attempt to ride the dragons, there seems to be an invisible barrier that prevents us from doing so. However, if you try hard enough, you can bump into the dragon's body in a linear fashion. Between this fact and developer details, I'm led to believe that at some point, the dragon's body was meant to be used as a platform, but got abandoned probably due to time and hardware strains. I mean, the dragons travel across Hyrule at immense speeds, and the Switch can't handle when people exploit the game to travel at somewhat similar speeds. Therefore, on more powerful hardware, this mechanic would have probably come to fruition. I also look at Super Mario Odyssey's dragon, whose body was shaped in such a way that it seamlessly acted as platforms for Mario to walk and jump on in order to deal damage. Now, this is Mario Odyssey, which is another flagship first-party Nintendo title that was released the same year as Breath of the Wild. This also leads me to believe in my previous concept, or at least not putting it past Nintendo. So what else would change if Tears of the Kingdom were on better hardware? Well, one thing that I could easily guarantee is underwater gameplay. This is something that I expect to be in Tears of the Kingdom due to E.G. Ainuma's cryptic wording, with him saying, as previously announced, the adventure in this sequel will take place not just on the ground as in the previous game, but also in the skies above. However, the expanded world goes beyond that, and there will be an even wider variety of features you can enjoy. Yeah, being able to swim underwater is a feature, so I'm fairly confident that it will be present in Tears. However, as discussed in my previous Tears of the Kingdom video, the lack of underwater gameplay in Breath of the Wild was probably a product of not having enough time and console strain. As I previously mentioned, if you have underwater traversal as a feature, there also has to be content under said water. On more realized hardware, there would be a plethora of underwater enemies distinct to the water. There would probably be as much enemy variety underwater as there is in the overworld of Breath of the Wild. It's a joke, by the way. But I mean, we reduced the number of Breath of the Wild enemies to 15 when we don't include variants, so 15 different underwater enemies would be a pretty good number in my opinion. I'll even let you throw in the Lizalfos that can travel underneath the surface of the water, as they're proficient swimmers on the surface. Of course, on better hardware, the underwater sections would be very detailed with ruins, natural structures, and possibly underwater geysers for gameplay elements. We could even expect one or two of the dungeons to include at least a portion of underwater gameplay. I would imagine that ice water and hot spring water would be surface bound, however. Now, with the advantage of this video's topic, I want to discuss one more thing before we part ways. If Tears of the Kingdom were on more powerful hardware, then all the components of the game would be expanded greatly. Breath of the Wild already set a high standard for Tears to build off of, such as the amount of content in the main quest, side quests, and shrines. Things like the mini dungeons or shrines would need to be a lot more realized, and would be with more powerful hardware. Things like the cooking system would need to be revamped. But how would these things come into play? With Tears coming out on the same console as Breath of the Wild, I think we should expect updates to each system instead of upgrades. For instance, cooking. There will probably be about 10 or 15 new food items, with most of the recipes being new. Perhaps they will give off different effects than they did in Breath of the Wild, as a perk in Breath of the Wild might not be a perk in Tears of the Kingdom. But I don't expect to see, for instance, updated cooking animations and or different means of cooking. For instance, is finding and possibly lighting a random cooking pot the only means that we will be able to cook? Or will we be able to catch fish on skewers or bokoblin spheres from out the water and bring it over to a fire and physically roast it? Will we be able to find our own cooking pot made out of different kinds of stones, which would then produce different and or better cooking effects based on the stone or cooking pot rarity? Probably not, but on more powerful hardware, I would expect to see changes such as that. And I got that idea because stone talus is very empowered based on the rarity of the stone they're made from. That wasn't just a pipe dream. How is side quests change? Well, let's look at God of War Ragnarok again, with 47 side quests. Breath of the Wild has 76 side quests, not including DLC, but they are less impactful than God of War's. Maybe on more powerful hardware, we would have 76 more meaningful side quests in Tears of the Kingdom, as I'm sure the number of side quests will only increase from that of Breath of the Wild. With Breath of the Wild, though, people didn't really directly criticize the side quests, but they directed their criticisms at the rewards for the side quests, which is honestly completely understandable. I expect Tears, of course, to come up with more diverse side quests and possibly take the criticism into account and give us better rewards for doing so, but a common theme for Breath of the Wild is that the reward for doing side quests is contingent on the difficulty of said side quests. If they were to take into account the criticism and give more meaningful rewards for the side quests, then the difficulty or longevity of the side quests would also increase. In conclusion, an important thing to mention is that with more powerful hardware, these things can coexist. On the Switch, I'd argue that any of these things can be realized except for the dragon boss fight, but let's hope that we get our much needed new Nintendo hardware before the end of 2024 and both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are backwards compatible, because as soon as we get better hardware, the scale and scope of Nintendo games we play will increase drastically. Stay safe, stay blessed, love you all, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.